Good day, everyone. Of course, I'm John Corstein. I'm Director Emeritus of the USS Monitor Center at the Mariners Museum and Park. And today I'm going to talk about a kind of crazy topic, and that is naval intelligence in Hampton Roads as we're developing ironclads. And naval intel had not reached to the level it will do so during the 20th century. And in essence, it's really more clandestine. I have to say that there is no formal groups of spies, so to speak, or intel service. The U.S. Will hire Alan Pinkerton, and he proves to be not very good during the Peninsula Campaign. He overcounts the enemy because, after all, Pinkerton is a private detective. So if your client wants to know there's tons of Confederates over there, he's going to let you know, yes, they are. Likewise, the Confederacy will use the CS Signal Corps to actually develop some spy systems. But once again, they're informal. And, there are all these examples of Northern sympathizers, free blacks like Mary Louvestre, who sent messages across Hampton Roads so that people will learn about what is happening at Gosport Navy Yard. Likewise, you'll see the same problem with the North. I got to tell you, right after the Confederates occupy Gosport Navy Yard, 21 April 1861, 5 days later in the Virginia Lynchburg, or the Lynchburg Virginian newspaper, will actually crow with great happiness that we have captured Gosport Navy Yard and we will be able to build 7 to 10 ironclads with the equipment that's there. Now, this is the first time ironclads are going to be mentioned during the Civil War, other than that, oh, we had the Stevens Battery. Oh my gosh, they're building ironclads in Europe, but it really doesn't become a byword of making the Navy successful unless you have, of course, information to share. And so every newspaper, North and South, will talk about these items. Here is, of course, the USS Merrimack. In essence, these clandestine efforts like Mary Louvestre and workers within the Gosport Navy Yard, they don't need that stuff because of the newspapers. I have to tell you how critical they are. This is, of course, the USS Merrimack, with all this news, is going to come out about, and it's going to change as the period goes with its construction. This is Major General John Ellis Wool. Wool is commander of the Union Department of Virginia, which only consists of the burned out town of Hampton, Fort Monroe, and Camp Butler on Newport News Point. But as in command, he's going to receive the first messages from the South Side, on October 6, 1862. And he'll forward this to Winfield Scott, who's then commander of the General-in-Chief of the U.S. Army. And he wrote, I also mentioned to you that Newport News was threatened by the Confederates in order to aid in getting to sea 2 steamers in the James River, and also the Merrimack at Norfolk. This ship is constructed to resist cannon shot. I have this morning seen the flag officer in the roads who more than confirms all that I've said on the subject, and that it is settled that an attempt will very soon be made to get these vessels to sea. In order to facilitate this movement, an attempt will be made to get possession of Newport News. We have guns, but not the artillerists sufficient to man them at Newport News. I hope you will at once send back 4 companies of artillery recently sent to Washington. If you do not send these or other companies' artillery to resupply their places, I trust you will not hold me responsible for any disaster that may befall us at Newport News. The danger, I assure you, is imminent. This subject I presented to the President and Cabinet Council when I assured them of the intentions of the rebels and that it was their design to attack Newport News. And as it was reported very soon, the flag officer is satisfied. The flag officer is the reference to Louis Mache's, Goldsboro, who is the commander of the North Atlantic Blockading Squadron. The flag officer is satisfied that such will be the case. He says there's no mistake as to capturing Newport News and that the steamers may get to sea. He also said the Merrimack is so constructed that no cannon shot can be made an impression upon her. So all of a sudden, these rumors that are coming, over across Hampton roads, just remember the setting. The setting is, wrong way. The setting is, this is Louis Machibres Goldsboro, by the way. But here is the set. There is Fort Monroe on the top of the image. It is the largest molten circle stone fortification in North America. And when you look at the map, you can see where Fort Monroe is, and you look right across Hampton Roads, and there is Sewell's Point. You go up the river, and you can see where Portsmouth is. That is where Gosport Navy Yard is. And so here we have 2 opposing forces, as I like to say. There is 2 opposing forces in every human breast. And, in other words, they can see each other's flags. And so obviously, this is an easy way to get information. You also note where Newport News is. For the Confederacy, that had to be their first objective because of the lack of heavy guns, and it is an earthen fortification, which the Confederates believe something could be done about. Where does he get this information? Well, I have to tell you, it becomes very, very clear that there is a spy in the Confederate Department of the Navy. Because when you go back to the official records and you start to read that Buchanan says, oh my gosh, I'm going to attack the Union fleet as soon as I can, hopefully by March. Well, all of a sudden the North gets wind of that, and we'll go into more details about it. But the most classic example is going to be when Stephen Russell Mallory sends a telegram to good old Franklin Buchanan, commander of the James River defenses for the Confederacy, with his flagship as the CSS Virginia. Mallory says, hey, what you need to do, once you destroy Fort Monroe, once you destroy the rest of the Union fleet, what I want you to do is go up to Washington, spread panic there, or go up to New York and spread panic there. Now, I often think that it is that Mallory knows there's a leak, and so he's trying to get the federal government to fear. And we know they do fear, and they are very, very shocked. But Wool will continue to receive conflicting messages over the next 6 months, which prompted the general to often send dire reports of impending doom to Washington, as did other officers. Louis Malshebras goes, now I got to tell you, this is right after, this picture is right after Goldsboro retires. But in 1862, he's 5'10", about 340 pounds. He doesn't do anything rapidly. He actually suffers from a dreaded disease known as ram fever, or Merrimack on the brain. So basically, Goldsboro will bombard Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles with news about the Confederate ironclad. It's kind of amazing. As he wrote one time, I've received minute, reliable information with regard to the preparation of the Merrimack for an attack on Newport News. I am quite satisfied that unless her stability be compromised by her heavy top works of wood and iron and her weighted batteries, she will be, in all probability, proved to be excessively formidable. So the Federals already have started to give themselves this fear factor just because of this news traveling across Hampton Roads. Now, I got to tell you, the Southern printed media don't help. And basically, if you see something printed in Mobile, there are so many Union sympathizers in every one of the Confederate states, believe it or not. Not everyone wanted to leave the Union. Many liked the concept of abolitionism. Many thought the Union should be preserved. So these folks become, the way that some of these newspapers more rapidly get into the hands of the North. So the Southern media is going to continually boast about the power of its new ironclad, but there were problems, as the Mobile Register will proclaim. It would seem that the hull of the Merrimack is being converted into an ironclad battery. If so, she would be a floating fortress that would be able to defeat the whole Navy of the United States and bomb its cities. Her great size, strength, and powerful engines, as we know not, and speed, combined with the secured by the iron casting, will make the dispersal and destruction of the blockading fleet an easy task for her. Her immense tonnage will enable her to carry an armor proof against any projectile, and she could entertain herself by throwing bombs into Fort Monroe, even without risk. We soon hope to hear she is ready to commence her avenging career on the sea. Now, why are they publishing this information? Because there needs to be a boost to Southern morale by early 1862. Just think what's happening, the Confederates eventually will lose Roanoke Island. They're going to lose much of the Mississippi River. And so this is supposed to tell them, hey, don't worry, we're going to have a super weapon. And the Confederate naval leaders were so concerned, and this is Gosport Navy Yard, and this is, of course, the commandant of the Gosport Navy Yard, Captain French Forrest. And actually, captains back in the late 1850s, 1860s, when they got a flag command, like a squadron or a Navy Yard, they became known as a flag officer. And he's got one of those beautiful dolphins, Confederate swords. Anyway, I have to tell you, the Confederate leaders were so upset by this flow of information. They continue to write about these problems and about the conversion project at Gosport. And actually, John Mercer Brooke is going to write that the Mobile Register contains information in relation to the Merrimack of such value to the enemy. Lieutenant John Mercer Brooke, the designer of the Ironclad conversion project, wrote in his diary, "Editors are doing infinite harm in this way. I should begin to think that even the South cannot tolerate a free press." Brooke was also concerned that the Southerners, their expectations risen by these articles, would, and I would call it a boastful press, that that the public would expect too much of the Confederate ironclad. He was relieved because 1 week later at the Mobile Register wrote its Yay Team article that the Norfolk Day book announced the failure of the iron plate test on Jamestown Island, but still feared that the Federals would begin building their own armorclads to counter the news of the Confederate ironclad. Now, Southern newspapers continued their their coverage of the Merrimack's conversion. Actually, one writer was allowed to go on board, survey the vessel in dry dock, and provided a thorough description for the publication in the Lynchburg, Virginia, that goes, "To get into it would be impossible, and to make a hole in it would be impossible, and with anything or any machinery, just the same. It would be covered with oak plank, 2 courses, each 4 inches thick, and then encased in railroad iron." Now, I got to tell you, French Forrest, who we see right here, who was a hero of the Mexican War and in command at Gosport Navy Yard, was so incensed by these conversion projects, he ordered the Gosport gates closed to all visitors. Workers were ordered to sign in and out of the yard. Failure to do so would result in the loss of a day's wages. And Forrest could only redouble the security around the ironclad. He sent for help, and on December 7, 1862, that help is going to come with the arrival of Captain Reuben Triplett Toms, Company C of the Confederate States Marine Corps. And now Tom dispatches various Marines to some of the gunboats like the Jamestown, but I think what he really does is he puts 54 men guarding the Virginian dry dock so that no one could slip in without proper identification to look at the Confederate ironclad. Now, I have to tell you that this is a very big problem because there's just no way to stop this information. Department of Norfolk Commander Benjamin Huger is going to, he basically, or Huger, saw spies and malcontents everywhere. He wrote to Richmond, "My object is to get rid of a disaffected and troublesome population, most of whom are idle, and most would be liable to turn against us if they were in any danger of defeat." Huger suggested that martial law might be necessary to control the local population. Yes, indeed. So the Confederacy is considering censorship of the press. They are establishing martial law because they know there's this exchange of information. Because every time a Southern newspaper writes something, they know it goes to the North, and in turn, they hear about it in northern newspapers. And there is a network of southern sympathizers and northern sympathizers that would be able to secret information, even copies of these newspapers, down to the south. This was pretty major. We'll see Major Norris. He was at the title slide. There he is. Now, Major Norris is a pre-war lawyer from Baltimore, Maryland. And so he is with the CS Signal Corps. He basically was assigned to Major General John Bankhead Magruder's command to actually develop a signal system and telegraph system between the various Confederate posts so they could keep aware of Union movements. Norris, however, after doing that, had an even more important duty to perform in Norfolk, as he was also chief of the Confederate Secret Service and Bureau. And does not know how much Norris learned from the Federal deserters. Nevertheless, he kept a vigilant watch of the shipbuilding work at Gosport Navy Yard. Now, so one of those people who slipped through Norris's fingers, I guess, was the former enslaved Mary Louvestre. And Mary, or Marie, was a seamstress in Portsmouth and had gathered information from northern sympathizers working on the CSS Virginia conversion project. So you have these pro-federal workers who are working on this conversion, and then they're happy to send information, and one of their conduits or exchange points would be Mary Louvestre. There are lots of other people like this. We don't know all their names. We only know Mary Louvestre because she gets a pass and makes her all the way to Washington, where she has an interview with Gideon Welles, telling about the fears of the rise of this Confederate powerful ship. And sometimes her name's spelled with an L, sometimes it appears as a T. But Welles later recounted that she, Mary Louvestre, told me the condition of the vessel and took from her clothing a paper written by a mechanic of the working on the Merrimack, describing the nature of the work, its progress, and probable completion. There, it's like a strainer. There's no way to stop this information. One of the bad things, or maybe not bad things, is that there was a truce boat that every day, weather permitting, would go from Norfolk to Old Point Comfort. And this truce boat was carried mail, believe it or not, between the North and the South. It carried people who were trapped in the South, either of Northern extraction or Union sympathizers, as well as malcontents transferring this information. Likewise, the Confederates, you get and you meet in the middle of Hampton Roads, but it's so easy. So, do you have a local paper? I like to read. And so these newspapers get exchanged. I have to tell you, John Singleton Mosby, the famous raider. Well, he was captured during the Peninsula Campaign, and he ends up on a exchange ship in Hampton Roads. He sees this huge fleet come into Hampton Roads, and he talks to the captain and says, "Hey, what are these guys doing here?" And the captain tells Mosby, "Hey, that's Burnside's command And they were going to go up to Harrison's Landing, but instead they're going to go up to Aquila Creek to support Pope's army up there. Well, Mosby gets exchanged 3 days later, and he marches right into Robert E. Lee's office and say, they're all moving up to Northern Virginia, which causes Lee to change his plans. So it's like loose lips sink ships. And that is one of those perfect examples of that happening. And the Confederates were so worried about security. Information leaked almost daily to Federals across Hampton Roads, escaped enslaved persons, exchanged prisoners of war, and Northern sympathizers and other informants supplied the Federals with up-to-date information about the Confederate Ironclad project. The city of Portsmouth established a patrol boat system, believe it or not, to stop enslaved persons from reaching Union lines with information about the ironclad. The patrol soon discovered messages in bottles that sympathizers were hoping to float across Hampton Roads, and that it would end up at Fort Monroe. And so there are numerous examples of this happening. So these sympathizer spies spent these cork bottles, and they made sure they did it at the outgoing tide, because the tide's going out right by Old Point Comfort, as you can see on this map. Despite the censorship, guards, and threats of martial law, the leaks continued. Simultaneous with the Ironclad's first float test, an article appeared in the New York Times commenting that the work of the Merrimack was stopped on Saturday last, and she is now at the Navy Yard, drawing so much water that she could not get out even if she was ready for sea. Norfolk being exchange point for prisoners. I mean, there's all these ways this information went back and forth between Norfolk and the peninsula. And actually, one worker sent a message to the Cumberland, and the Cumberland then in turn shared that information to, and it was sent to the Grand Cannon, who was Wool's, aide de camp, and the message was so shocked, they're going to attack the Cumberland in the next day. And so they send it up to G.V. Fox, Gustavus Vasa Fox, and then actually Fox or Lincoln gets word of this, and Lincoln goes to see Fox, and Fox says, "Mr. President, you need not give yourself any trouble whatsoever about that vessel." Why? Because Fox was confident, because he knew the USS Monitor was nearing completion. And there's, of course, the Virginia. Actually, he kept contacting the Brooklyn Navy Yard, John Erickson, etc., saying, hey, you need to hurry her for sea. As the Merrimack is nearly ready at Norfolk, and we wish to send her there. The Ironclad was still under construction, and Wells and Fox both believed that the Monitor could easily steam up the Elizabeth River and destroy the Virginia in dry dock. And of course, this little vessel, the Monitor, is supposed to be a great secret. Well, I got to tell you, there is no secrets in the Civil War, except for the day before flank attacks. The Union employ all sorts of espionage material. I mean, I think one of the best is going to be the hot air balloons brought down by Jacques Lamontagne to Fort Monroe in the summer of 1861, where he's able to go up to 1,500 feet, sees Norfolk, sees the Confederate camps, and so he's able to translate information. By spring of 1862, it is going to be Thaddeus Lowe, actually it's Thaddeus Stanislaus Cortland Lowe, if you want to get straight, and he is a balloonist. So he's got this barge, the C.W. Custis, and so he's able to look and see what the Confederates are doing, but they can't really make out what's happening with the Confederate ironclad. So the Confederates, however, were well aware of the Monitor's development. They didn't need a spy, and I'm positive there is a spy in the Confederate Naval Department, because every one of these important dispatches between Mallory and Franklin Buchanan end up at the desk of Gideon Welles. How they do that, no one has figured out. But, you know, there's sometimes the verbatim order that's written shows up in Washington. So there was a very major leak of information. Nevertheless, the Confederates didn't really need that so much, because the Northern publications were as indiscreet as Southern ones. On August 3rd, 1861, Northern newspapers blared that Congress had appropriated $1.5 million for ironclad ship construction. The New York Times went on to note that Gideon Welles was authorized to appoint a board of 3 skillful officers to investigate the plans and specifications of that may be submitted for the construction or completion of iron or steel-clad steamships or steam batteries. Hey, I got to tell you, on August 7th, 1861, every Northern port newspaper included advertisements seeking seagoing ironclad designs. You know, they are publishing RFPs. Now, there is a network of Southern sympathizers. We really don't know who they are, but they're sending newspaper clippings, you know, disguised in clothing or what have you, because there is a blockade running system that's taking goods from the north and going through Maryland and thence to the Virginia side of the Chesapeake Bay. So it was really great that they announced, we're going to get these designs. Once the designs are decided upon, once again, the New York Times writes an article about the different strengths of each individual ironclad. So the Confederates are getting this information so easily. So the New York Times actually publishes an article about the Monitor on January 30th, followed by one on February 4th with a feature article describing in the greatest detail this Ericsson's battery, this new Monitor for the Southern desire for independence. Wow. And it just so happens that the New York Times, you know, always would publish ships coming in and leaving port. And guess what? There in the port report, it's saying, oh, the Monitor is leaving destination Hampton Roads. I mean, how clear can you get, and how quickly can the Confederates know that? They knew the Monitor was coming just because of this information. And that was what prompted Buchanan to try and attack as quickly as he could. Now, actually, acting assistant Paymaster William Keeler constantly escorted dignitaries, curiosity seekers, i.e. spies, and the media on tours of the Monitor. He believed the little ironclad epitomized the strength of American industry and thus fired an intense interest amongst the public, North and South. Keeler even gave the editor of Scientific American magazine an extensive tour and actually gave him a set of plans for, yes, the USS Monitor and other construction details to him. And so once this is published, guess who still gets the Scientific American magazine? Some things don't stop, even though they're at war. And yes, John Mercer Brooke, Catesby Epp, Roger Jones, executive officer of the Virginia, get this information, and they get to glean the powers of this new Union ironclad. In fact, Catesby Jones would later quip, if I had that ship, I'd sink this ship in 5 minutes, because he knew of the strengths of the Union ironclad. Now, once the Federals learned about the Confederate, the Merrimack conversion project, they turned Northern industrial power to construct these new ironclads. Brooke could only hope that the Confederate head start would be sufficient to attain naval superiority and break the blockade. Since there was no censorship in the North, Norris utilized a series of Southern sympathizers and spies in New York City. And basically, what did they do? New York City, Baltimore, Washington. These newspapers were sent south via telegram, U.S. mail, hand-deliver written coded messages. This vital information was freely passed through the lines via what William Norris called the government route, and that would be the U.S. mail. The Confederates were just as informed about the Union ironclads as the North was aware of the Southern armorclads, yet neither side was certain as to when either ironclad would strike, and they only get an insight to it because of the announcement on March 6th that the Monitor is leaving the Brooklyn Navy Yard. You know, Hampton Roads would be an amphitheater for the impending battle. The south side was with such major fortifications as Sewell's Point, Craney Island, and Pig Point countered the Union positions at Camp Butler and at Fort Monroe. Now, basically, they cut off the James River to Norfolk and the Chesapeake Bay to Norfolk. Now, so there's all this news about the ironclads coming back and forth, and you know, all the commanders there of their ships, the Union ships, are kind of like impatiently tapping their feet. You know, Louis Goldsboro is going to be down in there's Hugy, Franklin Buchanan. We'll going to give a quote from him right now, and are like, when is this happening? You know, we're on high alert. In fact, Marsden was acting commander of the forces in Hampton Roads, and he was actually the captain of the USS Roanoke. And so he placed his capital ships to help seal off Hampton Roads in conjunction with these fortifications. If the Confederate ironclad sought to reach the Chesapeake Bay, the Minnesota, Roanoke, and St. Lawrence, anchored just off Old Point Comfort, would join with the Union heavy cannons on Fort Monroe and destroy that ship. Likewise, on Newport News Point, you have the USS Cumberland, the USS Congress, with Camp Butler to be able to seal off this fleet. Now, I got to tell you, Goldsboro, and I'll get to that in just a moment. Actually, Captain Marsden kept 2 picket boats, the armed tug Dragon and the armed tug Zouave, position to move some of the sailing ships, Cumberland, Congress, St. Lawrence, into action if needed. Captain Marsden noted that the Federal fleet was patiently awaiting the Confederate ironclad. I am anxiously expecting her and believe I am ready. Rumor of her expected appearance came so often, recalled Thomas O. Selfridge, Jr. of the Cumberland, that at last it became a standing joke with the ship's company. Marsden wrote to Gideon Welles on February 21st, 1862, that by dispatch from General Wool, I learned that the Merrimack will positively attack Newport News within 5 days. Okay, it's a little longer than that, but they know that ship is coming, all because of the spy stuff. So the crewmen of these Union ships were ready for a chance for active operations. They had been alert ever since October of 1861, and they drilled every man so that they knew not just the duties of their own station at quarters, but those of every station at well, remembered Master Moses Stuyvesant of the Cumberland. Captain Gershom Jacques Henry Brunt, commander of the Minnesota, summed up this frustration awaiting the Confederate ironclad when he wrote to Goldsboro, "We have nothing new here. All is quiet. The Merrimack is still invisible to us, but the report says she'll be ready to come out. I sincerely wish she would. I'm quite tired of hearing of her." And Van Brunt then added, "The sooner she gives us an opportunity to test the strength, the better." And yet still the Confederate ironclad did not appear. Now, the Federals had gotten reliable information that sometime soon after February 21st, that ironclad was going to come out. And when it did, it would go to Newport News Point. Actually, they discovered through the Navy Department link that Buchanan had asked John Bankhead Magruder, commander of the Army of the Peninsula, to cooperate with him to attack Camp Butler. And Magruder says, "Well, it's a little too muddy. I can't do that." But the Federals knew all about it, and still they had to wait. Each day that passed in March, the Union feared the impending attack of the Confederate ironclad. "She will be most certain to commit great depreciations to our armed and unarmed vessels in Hampton Road," wrote steam ram expert Lieutenant Colonel Charles Ellet. Goldsboro longed for the Monitor to arrive in Hampton Roads as a counter to the Confederate ironclad. "I asked, therefore, if she would not be well to send the Erickson," he wrote Wells, "to contend with the vessel on her own terms. I hope the department will be able to send the Erickson soon to Hampton Roads to grapple with the Merrimack and lay her out cold as a wedge." Union intelligence was excellent, despite the efforts of Huger, Forrest, and Norris to plug these leaks. I had to tell you that the Monitor received orders to leave Hampton Roads on March. Why did they receive that and to go directly to Hampton Roads? Because Gideon Welles knew that the Virginia was indeed going to attack as soon as these storms passed. However, before the Monitor even left Hampton Roads or New York Harbor, they sent a telegram up to the Monitor that didn't get to the Monitor, but the orders were, hey, you need to go directly to Washington. In other words, by March 6, 1862, the Federals knew the Confederate ironclad would be attacked. Many hoped that the ship would not work, that her power plant would fail. Those are the opinions of this person who wrote correspondence that, guess what, appeared on the desk of Stephen Russell Mallory. So there's also a leak in the Union Naval Department. So this is a huge, huge problem. So, and I have to say that he actually, on March 7, 1862, he ordered Marsden to send the St. Lawrence, Cumberland, and Congress to the Potomac River. The Union Secretary of War's new orders would leave only steamships in Hampton Roads. Either Wells had succumbed to McClellan's request to silence the Confederate batteries blocking the Potomac River, or he had learned of Mallory's orders to strike at Washington. That's what I believe. Regardless of his motivations, the Union command was deeply concerned at what the Confederate ironclad might do whenever it ventured forth from the Elizabeth River. On March 8th, they would certainly learn about the power of iron over wood. Now, I got to tell you that, so how does this information pass? Well, I must say it's going to pass because there is no censorship, because there is no martial law. There is freedom of the press, which, as some officers suggested, that should be stymied. This is not World War I, where we say loose lips sink ships, where, you know, that the enemy was always listening. No, we talked about everything, and our opinions are going to be formed by the mass of newspapers that are going to be published. Those newspapers are one of the biggest forms of transformation of information. And Norris nor Pinkerton, no one could stop it, because the Confederate sympathizers were disguised by living in the North and carrying on normal business activities. So whereas intelligence is really gleaned from newspapers, they know what's happening. They know it's going to happen soon by March 7th. They just don't know. And they know where the Virginia is going to go. They know where the Monitor is going to go. However, they just don't know the exact time. And that's why the Federal fleet was caught by such surprise. Before I gave this program, I got asked a couple of questions. You know, why wasn't there censorship? Well, the First Amendment, you know, they could not tell newspapers don't print that. And there was no Office of War Information that kind of controlled information. At no time during World War I or World War II did a newspaper reporter get to go into a ship and say, wow, those are big guns. Wow, that's a great engine. And let me write about it. And could you loan me the plans and I will print it? So you can see the fallacy between the two. Why were there so many misconceptions about when the Virginia would be ready? Because the ship took form very quickly. The delays are going to be really waiting on the iron to put on the Virginia, waiting for the guns to be made at Tredegar Iron Works, and waiting for the ability to gather sufficient crew. What about the Monitor? You know, on the morning of March 9th, Catesby Ep Roger Jones saw the Monitor and immediately says that's the Erickson batteries. Look out, for we're into hot work. So what does intelligence mean during the Civil War, especially in Hampton Roads? It means that there was no way to stop the flow of information, that the rumors are rampant. Mallory wrote this order to Buchanan to go to New York, to go to Washington, to make the Federals think the Merrimack, the Virginia, was more powerful, and also to change the way they were positioning their naval forces. But anyway, so that's the story of loose lips sink ships in Hampton Roads prior to the Battle of Hampton Roads. So if you have any questions, please fire away.
Thank you, John. We do have a question here. Excuse me, Mike comments. Early in your presentation, the drawing of the sail ship USS Merrimack has the correct spelling to match the river with a K on the end. Did the official name of the ship have a K or not?
Well, a funny thing is that I have written a blog about this topic, and I'm going to be giving a program next year about it. So I don't want to spoil with too much information. But in essence, the Merrimack was, and here we see a picture of it, was ordered by Congress, and the document ordering the authorization listed the names of the ships. So you had the Merrimack spelled with a K, and the Roanoke, and so forth. And so like, wow, that's the name of it. If you look at the plans of the Merrimack, with the original Merrimack built at Charlestown Navy Yard, which I have, wow, there they are. And at the bottom it says USS Merrimack with a K. Why is there such confusion? Well, it's because the Merrimack River, which begins in New Hampshire, everything in New Hampshire is going to be called Merrimack with a K. Franklin Pierce, who's president of the United States, guess what? He was born in Merrimack County on the Merrimack River in New Hampshire, where they spell Merrimack with what? A K. The trouble is, when the river gets down into Massachusetts, they drop the K. So the Merrimack River, the same river that's spelled with a K, becomes not spelled with a K. Now, so its official name is indeed Merrimack with a K. There are few that pay attention to this. Actually, it's easier to spell Merrimack without the K than it is with the K. And so newspaper editors and everything are dropping the K. In fact, many of the crew members of the USS Merrimack, like John Randolph Eggleston, you know, he will go on the ship and he says, "This used to be my floating home for 2 years, and wow, it has changed." He didn't say wow, but this ship has changed amazing. And that's why the Confederates on February 17, 1862 are going to rename the ship the CSS Virginia. And so in all official correspondence, they're going to call it the Virginia. Why did Virginia Department of Transportation build the Monitor Merrimack Bridge, spelled with a K? I know not. Even though I wrote them, hey, this is how you spell it. I even footnoted the letter, and well, we've already decided, and so it's like, okay, but yeah, there's more little secrets about the naming and all that I think I've already written the blog, and I'm just waiting to release it when I have the program. But yeah, any other questions?
Yes, Stephanie's wondering, when did newspapers stop publishing sensitive military news?
It's called World War One, because of the Office of War Propaganda. And so Woodrow Wilson, the federal government, believed that the freedom of the press was limited in part for the betterment of the war effort and of what the government was doing, especially ship sailings. I mean, it's terrible that the Confederates knew when the Monitor left New York. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So I think that is something that changes in modern warfare. So anyway, that's why.
Advance to the end, John, while I ask you a question.
Oh my God, help me.
Has there been any correlation to the role of the Underground Railroad with naval intelligence?
None that I could really document. The Underground Railway did not free as many people as we think. It was also a waterbound process. It was also, going up the Eastern Shore, etc. So I think, and going up the Mississippi. What I do know is one of the leading members of the Underground Railway is Harriet Tubman. And Harriet Tubman actually was a spy. And she goes down to, at first, St. Helena Island to set up the Port Royal experiment. She's a nurse there. She does all these great things. And then she is asked by Edwin Stanton, believe it or not, to act as a spy and help map all these little rivers. She then became a sidekick, so to speak, of Colonel James Montgomery, who was a jayhawker from Kansas. He wanted to do all these lightning raids, which was destroying Confederate commerce, but in essence was all Harriet Tubman did was say, well, they're Confederates up this river, and there are these plantations up there, this river, and there's a rice mill up this river. So it was more localized intelligence, not intelligence that's traveling, 400 miles from New York to Norfolk or to Richmond. And that is information that's extremely credible. And yet, oftentimes, it was not credible because, a workman, a mechanic, he knows a lot about ships, but he does not know the timetable. He does not know really everything they're doing to the ship. So consequently, he only has suspicions, and those suspicions make the Union suspicious. Mallory, who figured out he had a leak, he didn't know who it was in his Navy department, wrote certain orders that show up on the desk of from Gideon Wells almost immediately. And they were ploys, I got to tell you, ploys that made the Merrimack seem more powerful than it was.
Well, Alan is asking, same question, different location. What did the Union Navy know about the CSS Hunley?
That they did not know, because if you realize that the Hunley was crewed by Navy, but Beauregard kind of took it over as his project so that he would make sure it was used. No one knew. The only submarine that got advanced information is the Alligator, and that is the Union ironclad that also sank off. Well, it was an iron-plated submersible, but it didn't work well and sank off of Cape Hatteras. The Hunley was a secret weapon, and there's not a whole doubt about it, because the Federals and the Confederate newspapers weren't there during the testings and didn't know what this ship was, because they were Davids and other things. And Beauregard kept a pretty tight rein on the flow of information out of Charleston. So I don't think, once the David attack, then the Federals are going, wow, the Confederates are going, look what we can do, right? But it's after the fact.
Okay. Well, I think we've got our questions answered for today. I wanted to remind those of you that are in the area, on Friday, December 3rd, John will actually be speaking in person. Wonderful that we can do this sometime soon, about the Battle of Fredericksburg. So you're welcome to register for that and join us on the 3rd. And on Sunday, November 28th, after we've all had a fabulous Thanksgiving, John will be doing a book signing at the gift shop from noon to 2 on Sunday, the 28th. You can order signed copies anytime online, but come see John in person and have your Christmas gifts, holiday gifts inscribed. We do wish you all a great Thanksgiving. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, John, as always, for sharing your expertise.
Huzzah!
And we'll see you in December. Thank you.